Thank you all for joining this evening. Continue our trek through the holidays, get back into the swing of things. Just because you can do one or even two doesn't mean you're on track to be doing it all the time. It doesn't feel quite like a renewed habit yet, but it will soon feel like that, and we'll get the rhythm down. And this week, it seems appropriate for us to turn our attention to Yom Kippur. And the text that we will use is a very well-known poem. It is a poem that we have read a number of times before because I am so partial to it. But as I explained the other day to a number of people, we make basically our artful living as Jews through the holiday cycle by repeating things. There is a special art to repeating things. Can you repeat something and get something new from it each time? How many times have we read Parshat Bereshit? In the beginning, God created chapters. Or let this month be the first of the month of the years, the Passover chapters. We've read them all in their sequence, which we've rolled through the Torah all the way from beginning to end. We're now approaching the end again, which means, of course, we're now approaching the beginning again, because almost in the same breath, we'll have the ending and then the beginning. So we're used to it on that level. It's foundational to us on that level. Do you personally find it useful? Are there favorite sections of the Torah that you are, oh, I'm so glad that we're reading this one. How wonderful that I happened into the synagogue on a week when they're reading this, when we are reading this, or looking at the calendar mindfully and beforehand saying, oh, this is the week for thus and such. I'm gonna go because I love hearing that. Are there such parshiot for you, and where do they reside? What neighborhood do they live in? Are they Exodus stories? Are they Genesis stories? Are they devoid of stories altogether, like most of Leviticus? Are they rehearsal stories of things that have come in some measure before, like Numbers or Deuteronomy?
At the risk of being both wishy-washy and overly saccharine, I try to love them all, if that makes sense, because you want to give each of the 54 their rightful share, and I almost would feel bad to demonstrate a preference. I can't help but have, I suppose, some I like more than others, but I feel sorry for some if I didn't give them the full measure of devotion.
Like Obadiah.
What do you think,
Like
Sarah?
Obadiah.
Yeah.
What?
Well, for me, since I've gotten to read from the Torah at Bethel, I've developed certain favorites that I've read over the years. And I remember the last Simchat Torah before the pandemic, when you went through with the backwards reading of the Torah, I would focus on the sections I had happened to have read over the years, and some I cherish very much, and I feel lucky when I get to read them.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Sarah?
I wanted to address the moment that you spoke about, which is that moment where we reach the ending and go immediately to the beginning. Because for me, there's something so Jewish about never getting into we never finish the story, we never get there. This whole story that's unfolded about our people wandering and wandering to get into the land, and we never get there. We end up going right back to the beginning of creation, and there's something mysterious and puzzling and also somehow satisfying, because that is really how life is.
There's a great divergence on the shores of the Jordan River. In some ways, it takes us away from the narrative and then puts us right back into the narrative. Moses goes ahead. We separate from Moses. He's going to die. So he, in effect, goes on. He goes ahead. We circle back around to the beginning of the world and start the whole thing over again. And we meet him as an infant being born and then put into a basket, floated on the water. He has his beginning on the water and his ending on the water. And we're with him from one watery moment to another. But at a certain point, we take leave of him, and we take leave of the linearity of the text. It moves forward. He dies, Joshua takes over, the people enter the land, and so on. But we circle back around. Somehow, the Haftarah, is the only bridge that we have. And it keeps making these elegant little bridges between what we read in the Torah each week and what we read in the prophets, and only the prophets. It's its own little secret. We don't read from the Psalms or from Proverbs or Ecclesiastes or Job or any of the writings, only from the prophets. Someday maybe we'll probe that a little bit. But for now, whatever our preferences are, whatever our favorite pieces of the Torah might be, we take them with us. We put them on our back and we schlep them along between one horizon and the next, one watery horizon when everything is made, to the next watery horizon when the people are made and they're ready to temper themselves in the waters of the Jordan. And between here and there, we're comforted by or challenged by those chapters in turn. Some of them we like or pay more attention to than others. It's true. Although, David, I suppose it is also true that we try to be even-handed about it. Anyway, we make our way through these books, trudging through these books by virtue of our repetition. And repetition is for us a very good thing. And we challenge ourselves to see and to learn something brand new each time we engage one parasha or the next. Same thing's true with prayers. Unetana Tokef and Kol Nidre. Wait a minute. We did that last year. Can't we just skip that this time? No, we don't skip it. We start from the beginning and we go the way the ritual of the liturgy is prescribed for us to go. So enough of an explanation or apology for reading the same poem. This particular poem by Yehuda Amichai that we'll see in just a minute before us, we don't need to see it quite yet, is a poem that is paired, you'll see on the page, with a piece of Talmud that was the text that we used this past Shabbat morning for those people who were there in the Mishnah gathering, although it's not Mishnah really, but it is our claim of an ancient text that pairs with a poem, which is more broadly what it is that we try to do, especially during this time of year before Tishrei ends, during the time of Teshuvah. So this particular poem is in some ways very largely about Teshuvah. Not Teshuvah in the sense of repentance. To translate Teshuvah as repentance is pretty thin soup after all. Repent, to say I'm sorry once again. I'm sorry. Tell your sister you're sorry. I'm sorry. Well, all you've done is recited the formula. You're really not sorry. You might not even yet know what the word means, but your parents seem satisfied that if you utter those magic words, I'm sorry, that somehow the decks are cleared and you're no longer paralyzed by whatever the injustice was that you perpetrated. So I'm sorry, we learned very early how to use that phrase in maybe not the best of circumstances. That is to say, maybe we don't learn fully how to appreciate it or what it means. But repentance is at the heart, or I'm sorry, is at the heart of repentance. But the Hebrew for teshuvah means something much more than that. It means response. It means return. It means, Well, I suppose those are the two major translations that I would give it, to respond and to return, or even turn. Lashuv is to turn. Teshuvah, the turning. Are you saying you're sorry? Well, do you have to say you're sorry, or is there something somehow less formulaic in teshuvah? To say you're sorry means to confess. That's different than the word teshuvah. But putting yourself in a position of reflecting on the year or the times past and moving them forward, that seems to be the heart of the matter. And in this poem, we hear Yehuda Amichai talking about an extraordinary moment, about the moment when he can first enter into the old city after it has been liberated during the early days of the Six-Day War. So now, going in, presuming through the Jaffa Gate, across the no man's land that he would not have traveled through except at the risk of his life, but now going into the old city, he makes his way into the heart of the city for the purpose of teshuvah. Where is the heart of the city for him? Well, we'll see as we read. But I suppose the first thing we ought to do, first order of business, would be to actually read the poem. What do you think? Jenna, let's do that. All right. Let's just see if we can get it a little bit. Oh, that's better. It might just be my screen. It might just be my ripening cataract. Who knows? That's keeping me from seeing it terribly well. On Yom Kippur, in the year of forgetting, 1967, I dressed in dark holiday clothes and walked to the old city of Jerusalem. I stood a long while in front of an Arab's alcove shop, not far from the Damascus Gate. A shop of buttons and zippers and spools of thread of every color, as well as snaps and buckles. A splendid light and many colors, like an open holy ark. I said to him in my heart that my father too had a shop like this, of threads and buttons. I explained to him in my heart about all the decades and the causes and events, such that I am here and my father's shop was burned there and he is buried here. When I finished, it was time for Ne'ilah, the closing. He too lowered the shutters and locked the gate, and I returned with all the worshipers home. Really, a handful of words. Let's see what it is that you note as we go through it. On Yom Kippur, in the year of forgetting, 1967, I dressed in dark holiday clothes and walked to the old city of Jerusalem. I stood a long while in front of an Arab's alcove shop, not far from the Damascus Gate, a shop of buttons and zippers and spools of thread of every color, as well as snaps and buckles. A splendid light and many colors, like an open holy ark. I said to him in my heart that my father too had a shop like this of threads and buttons. I explained to him in my heart about all of the decades and the causes and events, such that I am here and my father's shop was burned there and he is buried here. When I finished, it was time for Ne'ilah, the closing. He too lowered the shutters and locked the gate, and I returned with all the worshipers home. Well, I wonder what it is that you see, where it is that you are taken, where it is that you are standing. How much of a Yom Kippur is this for you?
The first thing that stands out to me is that it's dark holiday clothes on Yom Kippur. A lot of times people wear white. And I mean, that coming out at the beginning just really sets this kind of darker, drearier tone.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. That's true. People do wear white. I wonder whether in 1967 people were a little bit more conservative, or they didn't really have kittles to wear or whatever, and so they dressed the way they did on every other holiday, which was to wear, the men would wear dark suits. And I suppose that's really the constituency, the prayer constituency of which he is talking. But you're right, they are not wearing white. They're not wearing white, so there's something cast a little bit darker about this. And yet it should be a very happy occasion, don't you think?
It seems that in this year of forgetting, he's like forgetting or is distracted from praying on Yom Kippur, and he is instead in these two worlds, the world of the Arab and modern Jerusalem. It's the old city, but the Arab shop, and then the memory of his father's shop. And this, in a way, is praying, I think, reliving this memory and combining it with the world of this Arab. It's quite amazing to make that the Yom Kippur worship. And there's something so beautiful about it. It's really, it's a word like breathtaking is what occurs to me, that this is how he is serving God on Yom Kippur, Avodah. It's just remarkable. I don't know what else to say.
You put your finger on something very interesting here, I think, David, that at the very last line, he asserts that he's going home with all of the other worshipers. In other words, he considers himself to be a worshiper. Did he go someplace and daven just beyond our vision, beyond the line of a poem? And I returned. He too lowered the shutters and locked the gates. And I returned with all the worshipers home. He considers himself to be a worshiper.
Do you think that he is actually talking about the worshipers coming from the old city, from the wall, or their synagogues? Would they have come out the same gate? Or maybe he's conflating the other Arab shopkeepers who are also closing their windows, that they've worshipped in some way, or the other shoppers, the other people on the streets. Just occurred to me as I read this tonight.
That would be bold, wouldn't it? If you considered everybody in the old city somehow to be a worshiper, and the act of closing the gate to be an act of piety in some way, conforming with the rules of the Mishnah. At the end of the business day of the temple, that you close the gate. And that's what happens if you can remember, summon up an image of the Arab market in Jerusalem, or the shuk in the souk, the kasbah, any place where you have been, where there have been little hole-in-the-wall shops, and there have been shutters, metal shutters, let's say, like garage doors that you pull down and lock with a padlock at the bottom. This is, strictly speaking, the term that's used for the closing of the gates, the ritual closing of the temple gates. Ne'ilah means gate closing. It's time for Ne'ilah. How do you know? Well, all the Arabs are closing up their shops. And it also happens to be the time when, if the temple were standing, the temple gates would be closed. It means it's time for everybody to go home. So maybe you would say, it's very provocative and very thoughtful to think that he's imagining that everybody is a worshiper who follows the same rhythm. On the other hand, he seems to be doing something quite unique, and he distinguishes between himself and the Arab shopkeeper. I think. How so? How might he be distinguishing between himself and the Arab shopkeeper?
Well, I'm just taken and maybe distracted too much by this thing about my father's shop was burned there. And that does set him aside. I don't know what he's invoking, something decades ago and all these events. And I just found that painful, and maybe who knows what's behind that, but it didn't allow me to sort of go back and think of all the beauty and the colors and the community stuff, but rather just some tragedy that occurred. I can't tell if he's, sucked down by that, so to speak, or is he just saying that happened and I'm good now, or not? It doesn't. So I don't feel that positivity. I want to feel positivity, but I find it, unfortunately, just distracting and makes me wonder about it.
There are little snippets of autobiography here that are important. He is reporting, or he's thinking about it. He's not, how is he communicating? Well, twice it says in his heart. He's communicating in his heart. He's not talking aloud to anyone, but he's explaining all of these situations and all of the push me pull yous of his personal history. His father was a middleman, as he calls him in another poem, a buckle man. He was a middleman between this one and that one. He was an entrepreneur, and he specialized in notions and in buckles and straps and yarns and threads and needles and so on. That's what he did. They left Germany in 1936, and I don't think that his father's shop, if he still had a retail shop even at that point, was burned as he watched, or he was traumatized by that. It may well have been destroyed later and he knew about it, or maybe he was just imagining it. But his father has something in common with this Arab. They're both salesmen, and they both sell buckles and straps and things that bind one to another, and evoke the strength of that kind of a connection. Even ironically, and here's the poet who's coming out, the year of forgetting is in Hebrew tashkach, tafshin kaf chet, which in English is 1967. Taf is 400 and shin is 300. And so anyway, there's a whole system of letters equal numbers, and letters are stand in for numbers up to 100, and then 100 up to 1,000, and then 1,000 and up, and so on. So this is 1967, trust me. And tashkach also has the word shachach in it, which means forget. Now, you can't always, rabbis are always hoping that they'll be able to give a sermon or a drasha based upon the actual literary meaning of the name of the year. And it doesn't usually happen. But Tafshin Pei Bet this year, Tashpo, I can't think of anything, but Tashkach, just too delicious to let it go. So in 1967, which was the year of forgetting, and ironically, it's a year of remembering. And it's a year of deep, deep remembering, because Jews have not been in the old city for a very long time, at least not wandering the streets of the old city. So, but in the memory is, well, here's how we remember going, or here's where our grandparents described playing stickball, or, oh, that must be the wall against which they played handball, or where that's the place where they must have gotten their falafel. And remembering all during this time, this rich time, the year of forgetting, it turns out ironically to be the time of remembering. And Amichai is remembering the old country. As it happens, His father and mother made Aliyah, their whole family made Aliyah in 1936, and his parents are buried in an Orthodox section of Jerusalem called Sanhedria, as I recall. So that's why, with the flux and flow of history, my father's shop was there and his shop was burned there, and yet he's buried here, and here I am, and so on. Anything else about that kind of prayer or dialogue between the Arab and the pilgrim and the prayer that strikes you as being interesting?
If you think about him davening there in front of this shop, but he's thinking of it as an aron, as an ark, and he's in some way in communication with this shopkeeper. I mean, one way to think of it is, well, maybe this is, a godlike figure for him, or he's thinking about that about the Arab shopkeeper as God. But another way to think about it is he's maybe in his head in the middle of the Amidah. And we start the Amidah with remembering our forefathers, our ancestors and their heritage. And in some ways, he's comparing his heritage to the shopkeeper. They've both, their ancestors have both been through trauma and both probably had places burned or taken away. And the shopkeepers is there in a city that's now an Israeli, Israel is now in control of it, whereas before it was a different control. So the Arab in front of him has gone through a lot also. And in some ways, he's commiserating with him. He's davening with him as his brother. And in some ways, he's looking at him completely differently. And maybe in some ways, he is thinking of him as the God who's over there. So I think it's very complicated.
I believe you're right. Susan?
Yeah, well, what struck me, I mean, as we talk about mutual prayers, was the idea of the old city, which nowadays anyone can see as a kind of sacred space. This was 1967, the first time since 48, I believe, that Jews were allowed to be in the old city at all. And I see the subject of the poem entering a sacred space and I'm meeting someone to whom this is also sacred space, albeit in a different way.
Yes. Two people having the same sacred, sharing the same sacred space. Yes.
In very different ways.
Just down the road, they're about 400 meters away from the Haram al-Sharif, which is to say the noble sanctuary, or Har Habayit, which we call the Temple Mount. And at the center of each of those places in each religious tradition is the most holy and transformative place. Here they are on the outskirts, one of them working because the rhythm of his culture suggested it's a regular work day. And that particular day was Shabbat. Yom Kippur fell on Shabbat in 1967. So it's Shabbat and it's Yom Kippur. And how much of that becomes religiously meaningful in the religious vocabulary and iconography of the poet or the prayer, and none of it is so meaningful except for how many people will be shopping or not shopping. What's the economy of the day for the Muslim shopkeeper? And he is, the poet is very careful to keep himself, or to keep his character anyway, from saying anything about prayer. He says, I spoke in my heart, I said in my heart, which is used for prayer in the Bible, but there are words for prayer and for praying in the Bible. And I spoke in my heart seems like I thought about it, but he seems to be intently and intensely focused on that shopkeeper, despite the fact that I can tell you that it was Shabbat and Yom Kippur, but I can't tell you how many people were in the streets. I can say, and you can too, if you summon up any time that you've spent in such places, that folks driving little carts led by donkeys and yelling, "Allo, allo, allo," and to get you to move out of the way, and people shoulder to shoulder in streets that are a riot of smells and colors and sounds and cobbles and so on, that it can be a little dangerous to stand in one place, and maybe you can't really stand in one place. You can't stand in the middle of the street. You can't stand taking up space just willy-nilly in front of somebody's shop. I got yelled at for doing that when I wanted to take some photographs. I got about 3 photographs in, and then I got ushered away to stand in front of somebody else's shop unless I wanted to buy something. So who knows how easy it is for someone under those circumstances to maintain the headspace that comes from being just, I want to commune, I want to commune/communicate. I also want I want to explain, look, you hate that we're here. You hate that your city has now been taken from you, and that I can be standing so close to the Damascus gate where only you had entree. And it's not my fault. I love it, and I've been living in Jerusalem for a long time, and I feel like I have a claim on Jerusalem, but I need to explain to you something about the forces that brought this about, that made this happening. Is there a bit of an apology here? Is there a bit of a teshuvah that is apology and thinking through and response and return and the hope of something that's restorative? And all the time talking to this Arab shopkeeper who is out of the picture. We never once see him or hear this person described, which perhaps leads to something that Sibi was saying before, that this shopkeeper might be God. Imagine that. God as Arab shopkeeper in the poetry of Yehuda Amichai. Very cool. We do know something about the store and about the appearance of the store. Did you notice it? Something rather luminous, like an open holy ark. Oh, I must say, I have looked for that shop, and that shop doesn't exist anymore. I even asked one of the Arab merchants the last time I wandered down near the Damascus gate looking for that shop. And I can remember, not that shop, I don't know if it was that shop, but I can remember an era when there were shops like that. But those were in days before Velcro, let's say. And before a different kind of technology and different kinds of marketing forces came into play, and the need to handle a lot more varied merchandise. And so such shops are not available, but they were glorious, with all kinds of scarves framing the doorway and beautiful flecks of silver and purple and lavender and black and gold. And the shops seemed so deep under these crusader arches, shops with 20th century merchandise and cell phones in the later days, but shops that have been shops since the 14th century, and maybe inhabited by or run by the same families in some cases. Who knows? And I tried to find this shop and to take a picture of it for us, and I couldn't find it. And I finally asked somebody who said, no, there is no such. I know just what you're talking about. And I loved he said to me, I also loved the depth that was apparent there. That wasn't really very deep, but it seemed like it was really deep, but definitely luminous, like a holy ark. A splendid light and many colors, like an open holy ark. I said to him in my heart that my father too had a shop like this, of threads and buttons. I explained to him in my heart about all of the decades and the causes and events, such that I am here and my father's shop was burned there and he is buried here. It does seem like if I've photoshopped out the prayer text, but I have photoshopped in or allowed to stay there the long duration of the day. What would it be to make those kinds of connections between here and there? Here's another thing to put in your machzor and underline whatever part of it is going to motivate you. It's a long day. If you're going to spend the day in shul, however, whatever shul you go to, it could be a long day. It's going to be, there are at least long sustained times. Can you develop a theme, an internal theme, and stay with it? I explained to him in my heart about all the decades and the causes and events, such that I am here and my father's shop was burned there and he is buried here. Is there something that you'd like to explain? And does that constitute, let's just open it up here for a few minutes. I've been talking an awful lot, for which I apologize. Does that sound like prayer to you? What do you think, Debbie?
You're on mute.
You got to unmute yourself, unless you don't want to.
It sounds like your doorway, open, closed, open.
Oh, it sounds like a doorway. Yeah.
Open, here.
Open, closed, open.
Mhm.
Yeah. Is it prayer?
Yeah.
It is prayer. Anybody else? What do you think, Artie? Is this vaguely reminiscent of something that happens in your personal world on Yom Kippur? I've known you all these years.
No. I bring a question from the math major, literally thinking person that can't quite understand poetry. Forgive me. What does it mean? I said to him in my heart, or I forgot what the other word was.
Explain.
I said to him in my heart, I explained to him in my heart. I don't really understand what that means. Is that sort of like I'm praying? I said to him in my heart. I don't really understand that.
Somebody want to help?
Help the math major.
You don't say it. It's what you say in your head and wonder in your.
So you feel I'm feeling it.
Yes, you can't say it. How could he say that to an Arab shopkeeper? He can't say that to an Arab shopkeeper.
Why? I don't understand. Why not?
Because of the decades and the causes and the events.
What it brings to mind for me is that, we're told that we can get forgiveness from God as long as we apologize to the person. The person doesn't have to accept the apology, but we have to have tried to make amends reasonably, or at least apologize to the person. And so because, the first three letters are on Yom Kippur, or the first three words on Yom Kippur, I'm thinking about how valuable it is to talk to the person, and then how much it stands out that he said to him in his heart a couple of times. And it makes me pull out of the poem a little bit, extrapolate and think like, when it would not be beneficial to apologize to someone in person, or like to speak to them directly, maybe the wrong would bring up more pain if I addressed it, like I think about saying this, making these apologies to people in my heart, and, wondering if that counts. And it seems to hold a lot of water here, Famakai.
Thank you. Thank you. This poem has very strong bones to it. It has a skeletal structure that can actually hold up words like apologize. He chooses not to use that word. He knows what that means. And in Hebrew, the word salicha, levakesh salicha, to ask forgiveness, is also part of the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur experience. But he doesn't say that. He says, I said, I explained. It is as though he's explaining it, perhaps I want to say more to himself. If he's saying it in his own heart, Debbie and Artie, if he's explaining it in his own head, in his own heart, and going through a kind of mental process that is both scientific and also experiential. This is what the data say, but and I wouldn't lose any sleep if I went by what the data say, but I also hear the tone in your voice, if it's your patient. I hear the way you're talking about it. And it makes me think on this side of the line rather than on that side of the line. And it's an internal language. And while he is, sorry, the cloud just floated.
No. I see that.
Yeah. And on our screen, the cloud, there was this big cloud that just sort of floated, this iCloud that floated in front of everybody there. So he's explaining these things. He's saying these things. There's something very emotional about it. If he tried to say them out loud, in what language would he speak them? This is now, is it the case, shall we expect that this Arab shopkeeper, inscrutable Arab shopkeeper whom we never see, speaks Hebrew? Shall we suspect that Yehuda Amichai, who has grown up in Germany and then from 1936 to 1967, been all over the place, but not in the old city of Jerusalem? Does he speak Arabic? Does he speak it well enough to be understood if he were to make that explanation? So in what language would he say it if he said it out loud at all? Yeah, Lori.
So one thing that I'm thinking about, Artie, is that he's talking about saying something in his heart to the shopkeeper as opposed to just remembering things. So there's a subject object, to borrow from Buber, right? There's an I and thou there. He recognizes that there's a relationship between him and the shopkeeper, that they live in a society together, and that but that, as people have been saying prior, what language would he communicate in, and would it really even be appropriate? But he's going through the process he's sort of doing this internal process of apologizing and reckoning,
I think
so that he can complete the process, or at least engage in the process of teshuvah. If it wasn't directed towards another person, I'm not sure it would count as far as Yom Kippur goes.
I'm thinking about the Al Chait that we say on Yom Kippur, and this is where we talk about what we've done. And I mentioned last time that, I thought you only had to hit your, pound your chest when these things were, when you did something, but everybody around me was doing it for everything. But in his heart, is he thinking about these things and maybe, wanting to say, you did this to me, or I did this to you, or I might have done this to you. And in some ways, that is his prayer, sort of asking for forgiveness or wanting forgiveness from this this Arab shopkeeper. When I think when we do the Al Chait, we say, if we know Hebrew, or if it's done in English and we say it along out loud, we're saying all of them, but which ones sort of resonate with us? Which ones do I really believe I might have done, or it makes me think about something? And it's not like we all have to raise our hands, like, oh yeah, I got that one. So that's the internal part, I think, Artie, that you were talking about, where it's just like, I think every year I find a few that I don't remember reading the year before. It's like, oh, that's in the list too. I might have done that one, I might have done that a little bit. And so that's where it's another way to take it. If this is all prayer, you can sort of go through the whole service and attach the whole service to parts of this poem, I think.
Yeah, Debbie. First, yeah.
I love this poem because Amichai may be walking through the old city, but what he's actually doing is walking through the Yom Kippur service.
In some ways, he's walking through the service. In some ways, he is touching the highest points of it and walking through himself and through his past. And he is using the day as a day on which he connects himself to his past, and his past to his present, to his living and unfolding circumstances, and renewing himself. I would say, if you wanted the Steve Sager guide to these ritual moments on Yom Kippur, this is more about achieving clarity than it is forgiveness. This is clarity. This is something that is not, here's a whole list of things that do not help a society. There's a whole list of things that we ought to form a therapeutic web. We ought to be part of a community that tries to steer people away from these things. Let's just be clear about that. And it's not a complete list. We have confessions on Yom Kippur that only go as far as the alphabet takes us. There are only 22 letters in the alphabet. You mean to say there are only 22 things, or maybe it's a double acrostic or even a triple one? You mean to say that there are only 22 times 3 things that for which we could say we're responsible? No, but you got to have a beginning, middle, and an end. Otherwise, you're just so weighed down
all day
you just get so stuck in your own causality. I can't possibly get out from underneath all of this stuff. Yes, you can. It's not about what you have done. It's not a personal confession in that way, perhaps, but it's about achieving a certain kind of clarity. And here is this poet who goes in, I'm imagining, for the first time through the gate that is associated with the Jewish quarter, the Jaffa Gate. And instead of taking a right-hand turn and walking around the perimeter of the city, he takes a left-hand turn and he goes deep straight into the Arab quarter. He's not going to Shul. You can see just the itinerary of this poem. You might say, well, look, Sager, this is just a poem. This is just some excerpts from his day, but maybe not. Let's just assume for a minute that it's not. Let's assume that he goes into the city and goes immediately to the Arab quarter. I'm not going to a synagogue. That's not where I find the best way of making Yom Kippur. That's not where I want to make a fresh start in the old city. First thing I want to do is stand in silent acknowledgement of what brings me and my family to this place. And so he goes straight to the Arab's shop. And there he stands, and there he explains to the Arab shopkeeper all of those forces of history that made it such that his father had a similar shop. The commonality of these two of the next generation, is a shop that was there, meaning in Ashkenaz, meaning in Germany. And his father's shop was burned there, and his father is buried here. And once I explain all of the causes and all of the things that have made it happen, it's not that I expect you to agree and say, oh, okay, all is forgiven. But I have explained the way I understand it. And then, having done that, clarifying, explaining, confronting, standing face to face, then he can say, as he leaves, I go with all of the other worshipers, kol hamitzpalalim, all of the other prayers, I go home. Considering himself, he didn't stand in a shoal and shuckle and say the Amidah and do all of these things and al chet shechatanu l'fanecha, you know.
But
he
in a
didn't-
way he did.
And in a big time way, he didn't.
Mhm.
He didn't, there was no formality to it. He didn't have a machzor in his hand. He didn't stand facing the Holy of Holies. He didn't say Tehillim. It was an internal process of the day. Well, what happened if you went to shul on that day and put your machzor away for large parts of it and engaged just according to the way in which Amichai suggests that one might do it through this poem? What do you think? Could that make for a successful Yom Kippur?
I do like thinking about Yom Kippur as, running a shop, and I, obviously I work at the synagogue and it's a very different experience for me this year. And the years that I've been working here, is really putting on the production and, we're doing tons of Zoom and it's really hard to, have the spiritual experience. But I do very much personally feel like a shopkeeper. I like this poem. It gives a little bit of honor and holiness to the fact that I'm working the holiday. And you best believe that at the end of that day, when we close the gates and then I lock up the doors and turn off the lights and leave, I feel like a shopkeeper with the day's done.
Excellent. Excellent. It just occurs to me now, I don't know that it's a decision for either of us to make, but if we had thought about it in the right company and with the right with the right folks, I've mentioned 3 poems over the weeks that, of which I've said, if I were you, I'd fold this up and put it in my machzor and take it along with me to shul. Maybe they should be screen shared. Chava Pinchas Cohen, who says, no. If you think Yom Kippur is the right day for this, you're wrong. It's really Tu B'Shvat. And Yehuda Amichai, who says, this is a way of making yourself a prayer on Yom Kippur. And Zelda, who says, this is an al-chet worth saying, that you didn't explore with your own imagination sufficiently. Forget about the tired list. How about a different kind of al-chet? One for which you are not just perfunctorily sorry, but also really sorry, and personally sorry, and in the presence of it resolved to do something else. Well, what do you think? Final words? I hope it becomes a useful poem for you, and if you want to go back and reread the Gemara that comes before it, you'll see an extraordinary story about a high priest who tells us the kind of story that a high priest never tells. This is the only such story of one who entered the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur and came out and has a transformative experience. And his transformative experience of standing in the holy place happens 400 meters down the road from where Amichai, a Jewish fellow traveler of a different generation, has a transformative experience so many centuries later. And you'll see that, well, there is a story that they could both tell together. So